In the year 1297, a small group of Teutonic knights returning from an unsuccessful campaign in the Holy Land disappeared in the mountains of Transylvania. Of the 23 armored warriors, 3 priests, and 14 squires, only 5 made it to the Hungarian city of Brasov. What they told the local bishop was recorded by a monk chronicler and immediately sent to the archives, where it lay under a seal of silence for more than 700 years. The document was discovered by chance in 1928 during the restoration of an old monastery near Cluj-Napoca. The manuscript was burnt around the edges, written in shaky handwriting in medieval Latin with numerous corrections and crossed out words, as if the writer had tried several times to find the words to describe what he himself could not believe. Modern historians have long debated the authenticity of the document. Some considered it a 19th century hoax, others the result of mass hallucination caused by swamp vapors or ergot poisoning. But too many details coincided with known historical facts: the composition of the detachment, the names of the knights, the route they took. And chemical analysis of the ink and parchment confirmed that the manuscript did indeed date from the late 13th century. What happened in those mountains? And why did the church so carefully conceal this story? The detachment set out from the Venetian port of Trieste in August 1296. The crusade had ended in defeat. Acre had fallen, and the Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land were living out their last years. The knights returned home by different routes, some by sea around Greece, others by land through the Balkans. Commander Dietrich von Grunwald chose the land route through Hungary and Poland to the Prussian possessions of the order. The journey was long, but relatively safe. Christian lands, good roads, many monasteries and castles where shelter could be found. They moved slowly, weighed down by wounds and fatigue. Many were sick. Fevers caught in the Palestinian swamps killed people as effectively as Saracen arrows. By October, the detachment had already lost 7 to disease and 3 to wounds that had not healed during the long journey. They were buried according to Christian custom in consecrated ground near monasteries, with wooden crosses bearing their names left on their graves. Each loss made the detachment weaker, slower, and more vulnerable. In early November, they reached the foothills of the Carpathians. The weather turned bad. Cold rains fell. The roads turned into a mess of mud, and the horses got stuck ankle-deep. The locals in the villages looked at the iron-clad foreigners with suspicion and fear, crossed themselves, and locked their doors. The commander decided not to linger in the valleys, but to go straight across the mountain pass. This shortened the journey by 5 days, and the approaching winter did not encourage long stops. They found a guide in the last village before the mountains, an old hunter named Vlad, who claimed to know all the trails in the area. He was a short, dark-skinned man with a gray beard and amber eyes who spoke broken German with a strong accent. When the commander explained the route, the old man was silent for a long time, then shook his head and said that no one went in that direction. Those were old places, bad places where the earth remembered a time before humans. Dietrich von Grunwald was not a superstitious man. 30 years of war in the Holy Land had taught him not to believe in fairy tales. He doubled the payment, and the guide agreed, though he crossed himself 3 times before leading the squad into the mountains. They set out at dawn on November 23rd. The trail led upward, winding between rocks overgrown with dark forest. The trees here were strange, gnarled, twisted, with blackened trunks, as if they had once been scorched by fire, but had survived and continued to grow in irregular shapes. The birds did not sing. Even the ravens, usual companions of any army hoping to feed on carrion, were not here. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of hooves on stones and the creaking of leather saddles. By noon, they had climbed to a considerable height. Below, a valley covered in fog stretched out, and ahead, sharp mountain peaks covered with snow rose up. The guide stopped the group at a large stone on which strange signs were carved. Not letters, not runes, but some kind of spiral symbols half covered with moss and lichen. The old man said that this was a boundary stone, beyond which lay lands that his people had not visited since ancient times. The commander asked why. The guide replied with a single word that sounded like dragon, but in a language that none of the knights understood. Father Ulrich, a priest and scholar monk from Cologne who knew many languages, asked the old man to repeat it. The old man pronounced the word more slowly, and the monk thought for a moment, then said that it was an ancient word, perhaps even older than Latin, meaning something fiery, winged, living in the mountains, a dragon or serpent. The knights laughed. Fairy tales for children. The guide did not laugh. He looked at the mountains ahead with an expression as if he saw something there that the others did not. Further on, the path became even steeper. It was difficult for the horses, and several times the animals stumbled on the slippery rocks, and the squires had to lead them by the bridles. By evening, they reached a plateau between two peaks. Here was a flat area the size of a knight's tournament field, covered with stunted grass and boulders. In the center stood ruins, the remains of some ancient structures made of dark stone, hewn and laid without mortar, with such precision that a knife blade could not fit between the blocks. The walls were as thick as a man's arm and no more than 2 meters high. The roofs had not survived. Father Ulrich came closer and began to examine the stones. Images were carved on them, figures of people bowing before something large, winged, and spewing flames. The monk said that these were not Christian buildings, but rather a pagan temple dedicated to some cult of fire or the sun. It was impossible to determine their age, but they were clearly more than 1,000 years old. The commander ordered the camp to be set up in the ruins. The stone walls provided at least some protection from the wind, which was bone-chilling at this altitude. They built a fire in the center of the site between the ancient stones. They gathered firewood in the forest below the slope, twisted branches, dry and light, which burned hot, but with acrid smoke and strange green flashes in the flames. The guide refused to sleep inside the stone circle, settling at a distance, wrapped in his cloak. When asked what was wrong, he replied that this place did not belong to humans, and that sleeping here was a bad omen. The knights ignored the warning. The first half of the night passed quietly. Those on duty took turns around the fire while the others slept, covered with cloaks and blankets. The temperature dropped below zero, and frost appeared on the stones. Around midnight, one of the squires, a young man named Conrad, woke the commander and said he heard strange sounds. Dietrich listened. At first, there was nothing but the wind whistling between the rocks. Then he heard a low hum coming from somewhere deep inside the mountain, as if a huge blacksmith's bellows were working somewhere far below, blowing air into a furnace. The sound was rhythmic, repeating at intervals of about 20 heartbeats. The commander stood up and took his sword. He woke the other knights. Everyone heard the sound. It was getting louder, closer. Now there was a second sound, a scratching, a grinding, as if something huge was clawing at the rocks, climbing up the slope. The horses became agitated, whinnied, and thrashed about at their tether. The guide jumped to his feet, his face pale as chalk in the light of the fire. He whispered a single word, and the monk translated. He said that the dragon had awakened. The sounds were coming from the southern side of the plateau, where the mountainside dropped away almost vertically. The knights lined up, spears and swords at the ready. The priests began to pray. The squires rushed about trying to calm the horses. The fire burned brightly, casting long shadows on the ancient stones. And then they saw the glow. An orange light appeared over the edge of the cliff, pulsing like coals in a furnace. The light rose, growing brighter, and with it the heat intensified. The air temperature rose so sharply that the frost on the stones instantly evaporated, turning into steam. The knights felt it even through their iron armor, a wave of heat burning their exposed skin. Then a head appeared at the edge of the cliff. What they saw defied any conception of an animal. The head, the size of a good warhorse, was covered with dark red scales that shimmered in the light of the fire like polished copper. The muzzle was elongated, with powerful jaws revealing rows of teeth as long as a human palm. The eyes were 2 vertical pupils against an amber iris, glowing with their own inner light. Smoke poured from the nostrils, and sparks danced in the smoke. When the creature had completely climbed onto the plateau, its size became apparent. Its body was at least 15 paces long, massive, resting on 4 powerful paws with claws like sickles. Behind it were folded wings, leathery, with protruding bone spikes along the edges. One of the young knights screamed and tried to run. The creature turned its head in his direction with incredible speed for such a mass and opened its mouth. A stream of flame burst from its throat. Not ordinary fire, but a sparkling white flame, the temperature of which was such that the stones it hit began to crack and melt. The knight in armor burst into flames like a torch without even having time to scream. The iron glowed red-hot in seconds, and the flesh inside was burned alive. The body fell, smoking, and gave off the smell of burnt flesh and molten metal. The commander shouted the order to keep formation, but panic had already seized the squad. Horses broke free from their tether and galloped into the darkness. Several squires ran after them. The creature took a step forward, and the earth shook under its weight. Its claws left deep furrows in the stone soil. Its tail, long and flexible with a sharp bony tip, moved from side to side like that of an enraged cat. A glowing liquid dripped from its mouth, smoking as it hit the ground. 3 knights rushed to attack with their spears at the ready. It was a senseless, desperate act of bravery. They knew they would die, but honor demanded that they fight, not retreat before the enemy. The spears struck the creature's scaly chest and bounced off as if they had hit a steel shield. The scales did not crack or even scratch. The creature contemptuously swatted one knight with its front paw. The blow was so powerful that it threw the man in full armor 10 feet away, crashing him into a stone wall, and the sound of crunching bones could be heard. It grabbed the second with its jaws and shook him like a dog shakes a rat. The armor cracked, the iron plates breaking under the pressure of its teeth. The third tried to strike with his sword, but the creature stepped on him with its front paw, crushing him into the ground like an insect. Father Ulrich stood with a crucifix raised in his hands, shouting exorcism prayers. His voice trembled, but the words were clear in Latin, calling on Christ and all the saints to cast out the demon. The creature turned its head toward him and made a sound, a low rumble that was felt not in the ears but throughout the body, resonating in the chest. It was not the roar of a beast. It was something else, almost like a voice, almost like speech, but in a language consisting of sounds that the human vocal apparatus could not reproduce. The monk continued his prayer. The creature tilted its head to one side as if studying him, then took a breath, deep, long, its chest swelling, a red glow appearing between its scales like in the cracks of a furnace. Father Ulrich realized what was about to happen and shouted for the others to run. The flames burst forth in a torrent, engulfing the monk from head to toe. He burned for several seconds, writhing, then fell, and the fire continued to consume his body until only a blackened, charred skeleton remained, smoldering on the stones. The commander and the 4 surviving knights retreated to the northern edge of the plateau. The creature did not rush to pursue them. It moved methodically through the camp, turning over stones with its snout, sniffing for something. It found supplies, bags of grain, dried meat, dried fruit. It tore them open with its claws and began to eat the contents, grabbing food by the handful. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that this was not just a predator. It ate everything in sight: grain, meat, leather bags, wooden barrels, even metal pots, gnawing through them with its powerful jaws. While the creature was busy, the people crawled away into the darkness behind the stone ruins. The guide was already there, pressed against the stone, trembling all over. The knights asked what it was, and if there was a way to kill it. The old man replied that his people had known about these creatures since ancient times. They lived deep in the mountains and caves where hot springs flowed and the fiery blood of the earth ran. They sleep for years, decades, but wake up when they sense food. Iron does not harm them. Fire does not burn them. Prayers have no effect. The only salvation is to run, to leave their territory, and pray that they do not follow. But there was nowhere to run. The path down passed by the creature. A detour meant climbing down steep cliffs in the dark, which was tantamount to suicide. The commander decided to wait until dawn, hoping that the creature would get its fill and leave. They sat for the rest of the night, pressed against the rocks, listening to the sounds of the feast, the crunch of breaking bones, tearing fabric, metal. The creature found the corpses of the slain knights and ate them along with their armor, gnawing through the iron like nutshells. By dawn, the sounds had stopped. The knights cautiously peeked out from their hiding place. The plateau was devastated. The fire had been trampled, all supplies destroyed. Only scattered fragments remained of the horses and men. The creature itself had disappeared. No one saw where it went, whether it climbed back down the cliff or flew away on its wings in the darkness. Of the 40 people who had set up camp the night before, only 5 knights remained, including the commander and the guide. Few weapons survived, 3 swords and 2 daggers. Everyone's armor was damaged, and 2 were missing their helmets. There was no food left at all, nor was there any water. The flasks had been crushed or melted. But the main thing was that they were alive and able to move. They descended from mountains for 3 days. They walked cautiously, listening for any sounds. Twice they heard that same rumbling coming from the depths and froze, waiting for the fiery glow to appear. But the creature did not show itself. Perhaps it had had its fill. Perhaps it had lost interest in them. Or maybe it was just watching them leave its territory and was satisfied with that. On the 4th day, they reached a village in the valley. The locals saw them, exhausted, in torn clothes and damaged armor, without horses or luggage, and at first mistook them for bandits. But the guide explained who they were, and the village elder provided them with shelter, food, and water. The knights spent 2 days there resting and healing their wounds. On the 3rd day, they set off again, heading for Brasov, which was 5 days' journey to the east. In Brasov, Commander Dietrich von Grunwald immediately requested a meeting with the bishop. The bishop received them at his residence and listened to their story. The bishop's face remained impassive, but the way he clenched the armrests of his chair showed that the story was making an impression. When the commander finished, the bishop asked a single question. Had anyone else besides them seen this creature? The knight replied that only they and the guide had. The bishop nodded and said that was good. Then came the words that the commander remembered for the rest of his life. The bishop said that the church knew of the existence of such creatures in remote places, that they were echoes of the time before the flood, when the world was different and monsters described in the book of Job, Leviathan and Behemoth, roamed the earth, that the Lord had left some of them behind to punish humanity for its pride and sins, that attempts had been made repeatedly to exterminate these creatures, but they had always ended in defeat. They were too strong, too well-protected, too dangerous. The only reasonable solution was to avoid their habitats and keep silent about their existence, so as not to sow panic among the faithful. The bishop offered the knights a choice. They could tell anyone about what had happened, but the church would declare them liars, victims of demonic deception, or simply insane. Their reputation would be destroyed, and the order would reject them as a disgrace to the brotherhood. Or they could take a vow of silence, receive monetary compensation for their losses, and continue their service, knowing that they had done their duty by surviving an impossible situation. All 5 chose the latter. The oath was taken on the Bible in the presence of the bishop and 2 witnesses from among the higher clergy. The wording was simple: never to tell anyone what they had seen in the Carpathian Mountains in November of the year of our Lord 1296. Breaking the oath was punishable by excommunication and eternal damnation. All 5 signed the document with their names. But one of them, a knight named Gerhard von Tannenberg, broke his oath many years later. In the year 1321, already an old man on his deathbed, he called for a monk chronicler and dictated the whole story from beginning to end. He said that he could not die taking this secret with him to the grave. That people should know that there are places in this world where it is better not to go, creatures that are better left undisturbed. The monk wrote down everything verbatim, sealed it, and hid the manuscript in the monastery archives, where it lay for 600 years. Modern scientists who studied the document after its discovery in 1928 put forward various theories. Some believe that the knights encountered volcanic activity and mistook the lava emissions for a fire-breathing creature. Others suggested poisoning by hallucinogenic mushrooms or gases from crevices in the rocks. Still others allowed for the possibility of an encounter with an unknown species of large reptile, possibly a relict population of dinosaurs that had somehow survived in isolated mountainous areas. But none of these scientists could explain certain details. The temperature of the fire capable of melting stone and iron, the size and weight of a creature that could crush a man in armor with one paw, the ability to bite through metal like nuts. Most importantly, no one could explain why all 5 surviving knights, who gave testimony independently of each other at different times and in different places, described the creature in exactly the same way, down to the smallest detail. The Romanian government sent an expedition to the specified area of the Carpathians in 1932. A group of 8 people, 2 zoologists, a geologist, an archaeologist, and 4 guides, climbed the mountains following the route described in the medieval document. They found a plateau between 2 peaks and discovered the ruins of an ancient temple with images of winged creatures carved into the stones. They photographed everything, took measurements, and collected stone samples. But the main discovery was made by accident. One of the guides, having stepped away to relieve himself, stumbled upon a crevice in the rock, hidden by thickets of thorny bushes. The crevice was wide, about 3 meters across, and went deep into the mountain at a sharp angle. Warm air flowed out of it, smelling of sulfur and something else that the guide couldn't describe, but which made him pale and recoil. The archaeologist descended into the crevice on a rope, carrying a lantern. He walked about 20 meters deep until he came to a fork. The tunnel split into 3 branches, each leading further into the darkness. The walls of the tunnel were smooth and polished, as if something had been rubbing against them regularly, scraping away the protrusions. There were grooves on the floor, deep, parallel scratches in the stone, clearly left by something hard and sharp. The archaeologist photographed them and measured the distance between the grooves, about 30 centimeters. Each groove was 5 centimeters wide and up to 3 centimeters deep in the deepest places. Something very heavy and very clawed had regularly passed through here. When he climbed back up and showed the photos to the others, the geologist studied them and said that the scratches were fresh by geological standards, most likely no more than a few decades old, a century at most. For comparison, he showed scratches on the stones of the ancient temple. Those were weathered, smoothed by time, clearly more than 1,000 years old. The scratches in the tunnel, however, were sharp and clear. Something had used this tunnel recently. The expedition decided not to go deeper. They photographed the entrance to the tunnel, filmed the surroundings, collected samples, and descended into the valley. The report was submitted to the Royal Academy of Sciences in Bucharest. The recommendation was clear: declare the area a restricted zone, prohibit visits by tourists and hunters, and put up warning signs. The official reason was the danger of rock falls and volcanic gas emissions. But the unofficial reason was different. In the classified part of the report, which was declassified only in 2001, the archaeologist wrote the following. While in the tunnel, he heard a sound coming from deep below, a low, rhythmic hum similar to breathing. The frequency was about 12 cycles per minute, like that of a very large animal at rest. The sound was so deep that it was felt not only by the ears, but also by the bones, resonating in the chest. And he also felt warmth. The air in the tunnel was warm, about 25 degrees Celsius, while outside the temperature was around 5 degrees. The source of the heat was somewhere deep below and radiated constantly. The Romanian authorities followed the recommendation. The area was closed to visitors in 1934. During World War II, a military observation post was located there. The Germans controlled the mountain passes, fearing partisan detachments. After the war, under the communist regime, the area was declared strategically important and placed under special control. Officially, this was to protect the unique ecosystem of the high mountain forests. Unofficially, it was because the NKVD archives contained documents about the strange disappearances of Soviet geologists who had worked in the area in the 1940s. In 1948, a group of 6 geologists climbed the mountains to explore deposits of rare metals. 3 weeks later, only one returned, a young engineer named Victor, in a state of extreme exhaustion and shock. He was found by local shepherds 15 kilometers from the base camp, wandering along the road barefoot, in torn clothes, with burns on his hands and face. Victor spent 2 weeks in the hospital, most of the time delirious, shouting something about fire from the sky and wings. When he came to, he refused to say anything about the fate of the other members of the expedition, only repeating that they were dead, all dead, and that he would not return there for any amount of money. The search party found the base camp destroyed. Tents burned, equipment melted, traces of fire on trees within a radius of 50 meters. But this was no ordinary forest fire. The trees were burned within a strictly defined radius, as if the source of the fire was in the center and burned the area in a targeted manner. Only fragments of the 5 expedition members were found: charred bones, melted metal objects, pieces of clothing. The temperature of the fire was estimated at 500 degrees Celsius, which is impossible for a normal wood fire. The lightning strike theory did not explain the nature of the damage. The theory that an aerial bomb had been dropped was rejected. There were no military exercises in the area. The sole survivor, engineer Victor, committed suicide a year after the events by jumping off a bridge in Bucharest. Before his death, he finally told the story to his friend, a psychiatrist who was trying to help him cope with post-traumatic stress disorder. The doctor recorded the story in his diary, which was discovered after his death in 1987. According to Victor, the group set up camp on the very plateau where a detachment of Teutonic knights had died in the 13th century. They did not know about this history. The document had not yet been widely published. They simply chose a convenient place with a flat area and the remains of some ancient buildings. The first 2 weeks went smoothly. They took rock samples, drew up geological maps, and took measurements. Then strange things began to happen. First, their tools disappeared: a hammer, pick, and a drilling rig. They had been left at the edge of the camp in the evening, but were not found in the morning. They decided that the locals had stolen them, even though the nearest village was 2 days away. Then, the food disappeared. 3 days' worth of rations sealed in airtight containers. The thief left no traces, as if the supplies had evaporated. The geologists set up night watch. On the 4th night, the comrade on duty woke up the others and said he could hear sounds coming from underground. Everyone listened. Indeed, a dull rumble, like a huge engine, could be heard coming from somewhere below. They decided it was underground water or geothermal activity. Hot springs are common in those parts. But the sound continued throughout the night and grew louder. By morning, the ground under the tents was warm, even though the temperature outside had dropped to 0. The next evening, when it got dark, one of the geologists noticed a glow in the crevice on the southern edge of the plateau, the very one discovered by the Romanian expedition in the 1930s. It was a reddish flicker, pulsing in time with the underground rumbling. Victor volunteered to go down and check it out. Young, curious, and not superstitious, he took a lantern and a rope and climbed down into the crevice. He walked about 30 meters until he felt the air becoming too hot to breathe. The glow was coming from one of the side tunnels, and hot steam with the smell of sulfur was pouring out of it. Victor did not go any further. He returned to camp and told the others. The group leader, an experienced geologist, suggested that it was an active volcanic zone and ordered the camp to be packed up in the morning. It was dangerous to stay in such a place. But at night, something happened that changed everything. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, everyone woke up to a sound. Not a hum like before, but a roar, powerful and vibrating, making the rocks shake and ringing in their ears. Victor ran out of the tent and saw it. The creature rose from the crevice, huge, covered with scales that reflected the light of the fire like molten metal. It was exactly as medieval knights had described it. For legs, a long tail, folded wings, a head the size of a car. Its eyes glowed red from within. Smoke billowed from its nostrils. The geologists froze in horror. The creature took its time. It slowly circled the camp, sniffing the tents, supplies, and equipment. Then it grabbed one of the backpacks and tore it open with its claws, spilling the contents onto the ground. It began to eat everything in sight, canned food along with the cans, bread, lard, even socks and towels. It ate methodically, thoroughly, as if it had been starving for a very long time. One of the geologists tried to run away. The creature noticed the movement, turned its head, and exhaled. It wasn't a flame, just hot air, but the temperature was so high that the man screamed and grabbed his face. The skin on his face was covered with blisters in seconds. He fell, writhing in pain. The creature approached, stepped on him with its paw, and the crunch of bones was heard by everyone. The other four ran in different directions. Victor ran down the slope, not caring where he was going, falling, getting up, continuing to run. He heard screams behind him, then a bright flash of light that illuminated everything around him as if it were daytime, and a wave of heat that burned his back even through his clothes. Victor turned around for a second and saw the camp on fire. White flames shot up tens of meters into the air, and the tents instantly turned to ash. And in the center of this hell, a dark silhouette with outstretched wings, spewing fire in all directions. Victor ran all night until he was exhausted. He reached the village only 2 days later, feeding on roots and stream water. The locals fed him, gave him clothes, and escorted him to the nearest road. He didn't tell them anything, only asked them not to go into the mountains, as it was dangerous there. The old people nodded. They already knew. Their grandfathers and great-grandfathers knew. No one goes to those mountains. Dragons live there. The Soviet authorities classified the incident and closed the area to all visitors. After the collapse of the USSR in 1992, control weakened and tourists, adventure seekers, and extreme sports enthusiasts flocked to the mountains. Most returned with the usual impressions: beautiful views, clean air, no dragons. But some disappeared. Medieval knights swore to keep silent, but one of them broke his oath before his death. A Soviet engineer committed suicide, unable to live with what he had seen. The Romanian authorities classified the data, but leaks happen. The truth always finds a way out. The only question is whether we are ready to hear it. Are we ready to believe that dragons are real? That they live in deep caves, in places where sunlight does not reach? That they sleep most of the time but wake up when they are hungry? And that the only reason humanity has survived is that we have learned to stay away from their territory. But that territory is shrinking. Humans are building roads deeper into the mountains, digging mines deeper into the earth, and laying tunnels through ridges. Sooner or later, we will stumble upon what sleeps in the depths. And then perhaps we will understand why ancient people built temples in those places, why they carved warnings on stones, why they made sacrifices, not because of superstition, but because of knowledge. Knowledge that there are forces older than us, more dangerous than us, and that our safety depends on whether we leave them alone. Brother Gerhard's manuscript ends with a single sentence that has lost its meaning in translation, but in the original Latin sounds like a covenant. The dragon watches in the darkness. Do not wake him. Sleep while he sleeps, and pray that his sleep will be eternal.